Hello, Brian Weeks here again with another contract consideration. This video clip will cover the topic of fair standby charges. In it, I will outline the concepts of what makes up standby charges and how they should be calculated or verified to meet the contract language of the MMCD. However, the topic of determining appropriate equipment rates is too complicated for this short video, so I'll suggest a simple approach that should work in many situations. First, let's start with the definition. A standby charge is part of a claim presented by a contractor for a delay caused by the owner or one of its agents, alleging that some of the contractor's assets could not be utilized for a period of time, although their related costs continued. Have a look at another of my contract considerations on dealing with delays for a discussion on when an owner becomes liable for delay charges under an MMCD contract. Although the contractor will be the one to formulate the delay claim with its standby charges, it will be the contract administrator, or CA, who must evaluate both the entitlement and the actual amounts if entitlement is proven. Nevertheless, the claim will be processed more smoothly if the contractor prepares the claim knowing what costs and markups are going to be allowed. I hope this video can assist both CAs and contractors. A standby charge can have one or more components. The chart on this slide shows the basics: labor, equipment, and overheads. The most simple component is labor. When a job is delayed, there will almost always be some labor that became idle, even if only for a short time. This labor can be directly employed by the contractor, by its subcontractors, or perhaps contract hires such as testing technicians. If it is not practical to reassign equipment, it too may be idled. Once again, this equipment may be owned or hired by the contractor or its subcontractors. I'll talk about equipment more later, as it is one of the more complicated components. Overheads fall into two categories: site overheads and head office or other overheads. It is normally appropriate to calculate the site overheads, that is the site overhead staff and their equipment, on a calculated out-of-pocket cost basis as direct job costs rather than as a percentage of the labor and equipment standby costs. On the other hand, head office overheads are reimbursed at a fixed 10% of all of the above costs under GC 13.1.12. Finally, the same clause sets the allowable profit markup at 10% on all of the above costs, including the head office overheads. This all seems fairly straightforward. However, a key concept to understand is the effect of the duration of the delay. In the short term, all costs are fixed, as there is almost nothing that can be done to mitigate them. For example, if the delay is an hour or two, there is no practical way to eliminate labor costs if the workers cannot be reassigned. If the delay is days or more, it is likely the workers can be reassigned or laid off, thereby eliminating the owner's obligation to pay for them. In the long term, however, all costs become variable, as there will be ways to mitigate or eliminate the normally fixed cost components. For example, if a job is delayed from the fall to complete next spring, in most cases, all labor and equipment standby charges should disappear, as those assets are redeployed or disposed of. From the CA's perspective, this becomes a bit tricky, as different situations have different time frames for short versus long. For example, a dump truck hired by the contractor can be taken off hire on a moment's notice. On the other hand, if the contractor owns that truck, its fixed costs will continue for months or years. The point here is that the CA must evaluate the contractor's submitted costs for reasonableness, given the relevant circumstances. Remember, under the MMCD, the CA only gives the initial decision. Either party can dispute that decision to have it reviewed, providing they follow the correct process under GC 17. So, what's allowed in each category? Let's start by looking at labor. The wages plus payroll burdens, such as employment insurance, Canada pension, union contributions, and all other benefits, are eligible for claiming. For example, a laborer making $20 an hour may have a payroll cost to the contractor of $25 an hour when the burdens are added on. The contractor must prove to the CA's satisfaction that the submitted rates are correct, or the CA has the authority to substitute his or her own judgment of an appropriate rate. Keep in mind that only workers at the job site are eligible for direct cost reimbursement under standby. All workers at the head office or other locations are expected to be covered by the allowance for overheads. Allowable costs for equipment on standby are harder to determine because the owner is only liable for the fixed cost portion of the allowable rate. Now, every equipment rate is comprised of several components, but they fall into two categories, fixed and variable. Fixed costs are those which continue to apply whether or not the equipment is operating. Examples of this are depreciation, interest, insurance, and allocated costs for support equipment and shops. Remember what I said. In the short term, these are both real and unavoidable. Variable costs, on the other hand, are those which only occur when the equipment is operating. Examples are fuel, oil, grease, filters, tire or track wear, cutting edges, routine servicing, and provisions for major repairs, such as an allowance for a $25,000 engine overhaul every 15,000 hours. All found rates in reference manuals often include the operator's wages, but because we deal with labor separately, we don't factor them in here again. Similarly, some equipment rates allow for overhead and profit, but we deal with them separately too. By definition, a piece of equipment is not operating when it's on standby. Hence, the variable cost portion of the rate drops out, and the owner is only liable for the fixed portion. Unfortunately, this is a very difficult number to determine. It is highly affected by the contractor's choice of annual utilization. The higher the planned utilization, the lower the fixed cost component will be when looking at an hourly rate. For example, if the machine has an annual fixed cost of $100,000 per year, a reasonable number for a large loader or hoe, the choice of whether the anticipated utilization is 1,000 or 2,000 hours makes a difference of $50 per hour in the equipment rate. This far exceeds the error in the other assumptions that go into making up the full rate. If you wish to learn more about how to accurately determine the various components of an equipment rate, there are lots of hard copy and electronic resources available, as well as full courses on this topic, but that's beyond the scope of this short video. So what's a CA to do to evaluate the reasonableness of a submitted standby charge for equipment? Clearly, the standby rate should be less than the full rate, but what's right? Here's a quick way to get a close approximation. Step 1. Find the rate that would be allowed in the current edition of the BC Government Blue Book for hourly equipment rentals. The Blue Book rates listed do not include profit, but make sure to select from the column that does not include the operator. Step 2. Using the manufacturer's handbook, for example, the CAT handbook for Caterpillar equipment, look in the owning and operating cost section. It will provide a range for each type of variable cost. Choose the typical or average point within each range for each component, unless there are specific reasons to use something else. Step 3. Add up all the variable cost items and subtract that sum from the Blue Book rate. The difference will be a good approximation of the fixed portion of the full rate. This is the amount to use when approving a standby rate, again, unless there are special circumstances. Even if you don't have a manufacturer's handbook for the make of equipment under analysis, another manufacturer's handbook will put you in the right neighborhood. There's not a lot of spread in variable costs among similar machines, with the possible exception of fuel consumption, which is something the contractor will know with some accuracy. Finally, let's consider overheads. For short-term standby, site overheads are real and fixed, so they should be treated like any other labor or equipment cost. As always, only truly idle people or equipment qualify for standby reimbursement. All other overhead costs beyond the site are to be reimbursed by the fixed 10% allowance on the costs permitted. So, to summarize, number one, it is appropriate to compensate contractors for standby claims when the owner or its agents cause the delay and assets are idled. Number two, the duration of the delay will determine which costs are fixed or avoidable. Remember, for short-term delays, almost everything is fixed. Number three, contractors must prove their costs to the CA's satisfaction, or the CA can substitute his or her own judgment. Number four, standby charges for labor and overheads are quite simple, just provable costs for truly idle assets and allowable markups. Standby for equipment is more complicated, as the owner is liable only for the fixed portion of the allowable rates. And sometimes it's easier to get the fixed portion by subtracting typical variable costs from the allowed non-operated rates. I hope this has helped clarify this contract consideration. Please check our website for further assistance and to see what other topics are presented in the series. Thanks for watching.